Welcome to our discussion of the Administration of Justice 2 course guide, the second edition from July of 2019. My name is Dr. Mark Landahl. I'm an adjunct professor with Frederick Community College at the Mid-Atlantic Center for Emergency Management and Public Safety, and I was one of the content developers for the Administration of Justice 2 course guide revision. So what we intend to do in this is go over the course guide, seed it in career and technology education in Maryland, and then go through some of the content, not the entire content, but the content of the Administration of Justice course guide and the lessons. So the Administration of Justice course guide there, again, developed July of 2019. It is for the Maryland Department of Education or Maryland State Department of Education, and is developed at the, again, Frederick Community College Mid-Atlantic Center for Emergency Management and Public Safety. So the course sits in the Human Resource Services career cluster. And again, the cluster examines scientific knowledge and increased public awareness of social problems and issues that contribute to a demand for high quality social services. Public concern over crime, security, emergency response, and the increased demand for legal intervention. Obviously, we have more complex problems that we've been seeing, none more so than the COVID-19 response, where we have the mixture of public health, emergency management, law enforcement, the entire spectrum of government involved in those things. Also, we saw that the opioid crisis and other components like that, where all of our human resource services components, all of our human services components have to come together. And it's now, those are the type of complex problems that we want to look at. You can't look at it through just the lens of law enforcement and think that we'll arrest our way out of it, nor can you look at it, are we only going to treat our way out of it? So these problems are complex and becomes part of that component as we look at to have students become career ready in more complex fields in law enforcement, emergency services, and beyond. So the cluster, the Administration of Justice 2 course sits in the Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness program, with, again, the three areas of concentration being Homeland Security Sciences, Criminal Justice and Law Enforcement, and Information and Communications Technology. Obviously, we see that as the pathway serving. This course serves as the second component in the Criminal Justice and Law Enforcement pathway. So overall, the Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness program, again, inside of that cluster, it leads students for an industry certification or college credit in one of those three areas that we discussed: Homeland Security Sciences, Criminal Justice, Law Enforcement, and our Information, Community, and Communications Technology. Again, as we talked about, the really complex problems that we have now in the Human Resource Services component, in our public service element, and preparing those students for what is going to be very complex and has been complex in the 20 years since 9/11. But when you add Hurricane Katrina, the additive effect of the hurricane season of 2017, and then again now with the complexity of the COVID-19 crisis, we can see why this is an important area for career and technology education that is only going to grow. So the Criminal Justice and Law Enforcement pathway, again, as the Administration of Justice concentrations, it's already also known. It provides students with that broad background of the Administration of Justice. Again, large focus on law enforcement, but again, the other components being the court services components being parole and probation, the corrections component of it, and also within that dispatching and other components that all fit together for that full spectrum of criminal justice, the field of criminal justice. So the Administration of Justice 2, when we look at the pathways in the Homeland Security and Emergency Preparedness program, we really see Administration of Justice as 2 as the second course in the Criminal Justice and Law Enforcement pathway. So the course focuses on law enforcement procedure, organized crime, street gangs, drug abuse, federal law enforcement agencies, the first responder role of law enforcement, corrections, the process of evidence collection and handling, and careers in the justice system. With it, students recognize the everyday challenges and operations of law enforcement agencies with a special attention to career potential and development. That is one of the core elements of this, because a lot of students want to have careers in criminal justice, but early in their lives. And when we have them at this point, they can be making some of the mistakes that may keep them from being able to work in that public safety community. So it's a very important component of this as well, of understanding what the requirements of the careers in this pathway are. So the course resources, there are several course resources, and we did use the textbook that has been used and is multiple editions available. The 4th edition, this is of Introduction to Policing, but there are also some alternative, as we've tried to enforce through any of the courses, or not enforce, but provide resources that are open educational resources. Also linked here are the Utah State Board of Education have law enforcement and the criminal justice student manual, which is published by the state, so it's open access. Obviously, things are a lot geared toward Utah state law, but a lot of things can be, as we know, these are all constitutional elements from which they fall, that a lot of that Maryland law can be substituted in for those differences, and then it's an open access, free use resource. Also, a few other elements. Ethics in Law Enforcement is a textbook that's openly available as an open educational resource. Another text being Introduction to Criminal Investigation, Process, Practices, and Thinking is also an open access textbook available on the internet. So there are several components that we tried to look at to have things that are open and available, low cost, that even they can also be used and look to see if there's things that can supplement lessons, or things that can become standalone readings with lessons in there. There are at least resources that are out there that are available if there's some gap in the text that's being used in a particular county, in a particular school, can say, well, let me look through these other ones and see if there's some things that I can supplement as classroom resources. So each unit just has some general suggestions about assessment methods. We know that because things differ from county to county throughout the state, none of this is mandatory, that there are assessment materials that are developed. So there was no intent to create any assessment materials that would have to be utilized in some way, shape, or form. Obviously, dealing with our geographic and our educational diversity across the state in how this is approached. So those components are just suggestions. So the units that make up Administration of Justice 2 are Unit 1, Policing and Corrections, Unit 2, Policing Non-Traditional Crime, Unit 3 is Illegal Drugs, Unit 4, Crime Scene Investigation and Forensic Science, Unit 5, Careers in the Justice System. So what we're going to do is go through and take a look at each of the units and take a look at one or two topic areas, lessons or topic areas that are provided in there without touching on every component that's in there, but just a touch and a slice from each one of those units. So as we head into Unit 1, Policing and Corrections, the terminal learning objectives are to delineate the processes used in law enforcement activities such as traffic stops, arrest, search and seizure, and surveillance, analyze the role of local, state, and federal agencies play in the administration of justice, assess the importance of training standards in policing and corrections, and recognize the role of corrections in the criminal justice system. An example from the lesson guide on this lesson of the history of policing in America. Learning objectives discuss the historic functions of law enforcement, discuss the various levels and types of police in the U.S., and describe the evolution of policing in the United States. There are associated chapters, but then within the text that we had as the main component, but then again supplemented by open educational resources. So important dates in law enforcement history, from the National Law Enforcement Officer Memorial Foundation, things about early history of policing, history of the police, where there are some open access chapters that are available from textbooks. So some options, not that those would all be readings, but options that can support lessons in this area. And a suggested assignment or activity, students can develop a timeline of important dates in the history of policing in the U.S., share and compare timelines in classroom activity. There's a number of interesting things you could do with that. You could break out the factual thing, make them find the years, and then as they're assigned things individually, then you could actually physically have the students organize into a timeline and talk about that particular component, and that would therefore get some interest in activity and some movement in the classroom as an option for a lesson, and also to assess a little bit of learning. Another example from Unit 1, Police Organization and Administration, explain the basic organization style of U.S. police departments. identify the factors that contribute to the organizational design of a police department, compare the difference between administrative and operational functions, and discuss how organizational style guides decision-making in police departments. So in there, again, a number of resources that are open. The theory of administration of police agencies, police organization and management, managing police departments post-Ferguson, a lot of these components, elements of decision-making in police agencies. Again, a lot of options for you. Also using some of our police organizations, you can use your local organization, local police agency, and ask them for an organizational chart. Here, the Maryland State Police is linked as an example. Also in the additional, you can see down toward the bottom, and others, the FBI's organizational chart. So there's all kinds of comparisons and things that can go on with that. You can even do a local municipal department or a county level department, look at the difference with the state police, compare the difference up to the FBI, and look at the difference of the scope of responsibilities and how does that affect their police organization. So one option would be to make an organizational diagram of a law enforcement agency or two and compare them and say, why are they different? And you can even look at that with specialized police departments like the Maryland Department of Natural Resources Police. They have a very focused function that's a lot different from the Maryland State Police or a local municipal police agency. So some of those things can be done to discern the difference about why do we have all these different police agencies? Why are they organized around what their mission is? And there's a lot of critical thinking that can be done in that to look and just say, oh no, it's just a police car. Well, how does that fit into that? How do things even that students see? How do their school resource officers, if they have them, fit into the organizational structure of a police agency? And it doesn't differ from one place to another. Where does a municipal police officer's SRO fall in their organization chart versus a county organization? Or does the Maryland State Police have school resource officers? And you look at that and say, whose function are those? There's a lot of learning that can happen around those things and a lot of critical thinking about why police agencies are structured the way that they are. So a lot of things that can be done in here to supplement and also, again, to get to that higher order thinking about it. So additional lessons and topic areas in Unit 1 include police operations, police conduct, the function and role of corrections in the administration of justice, current issues in policing, and the future of policing in America. All of those things, there's a lot that can be done in there. Obviously, there has been such radical change and a lot of influences on policing. We've seen, the civil unrest of Baltimore, civil unrest in Ferguson. How has that changed policing? You can look even at things like legalization or decriminalization of substance that used to be illegal. You can look at the issues of driving under the influence of things like marijuana and the challenge that is to science and to roadside tests, and why is that different? How do impairment tests for alcohol work or not work for marijuana, and how large is the problem? There's a lot of things that can be done in here. Again, so much that can be done from a critical thinking perspective and an engagement perspective with current events and that critical thought process around it. Unit 2, policing non-traditional crimes. In this unit, the learning objectives are to analyze the impact of organized crime and street gangs on today's law enforcement professionals, assess the impact of non-traditional crime problems such as cybercrime and human trafficking. So an example lesson here is about organized crime. Define the concept of organized crime, describe the activities of organized crime, review how organized crime affects a local community. Again, supported chapters in the recommended text, but then also other things that could be used. FBI's webpage on transnational organized crime, FBI's glossary of terms related to those components, the crime museums component about the organized origins of organized crime, and then even looking at the United Nations has a module about organized crime. So there's a lot of things out there that can be used. And those different perspectives on organized crime can be, you can look at it even just the challenge for local police agencies with limited jurisdictions in working with organized crime, can look at how that may affect the structure of police agencies or that cooperation that may be necessary between a municipal police agency and state and federal law enforcement agencies to deal with things that cross state lines, all those components. So it's what a suggested assignment or activity here, a homework assignment to research one illegal activity classified as organized crime and share it in a classroom discussion, just one option. The second lesson inside this, not that these are necessarily sequential, just things that I pulled out that I thought were interesting, a lesson around human trafficking. So learning objectives define human trafficking, identify the government agencies involved in combating human trafficking, assess the impact of human trafficking on victims. So you can see again, this one not necessarily supported directly by the text, but supported by open resources. The FBI has human trafficking resources that can be used. The Department of Homeland Security's Blue campaign about human trafficking, the Maryland Human Trafficking Task Force, and even some local counties have trafficking task force. Obviously, it's an option to a good thing. Again, might be a specific issue to bring someone in from a state or federal law enforcement agency that deals, a local state or federal organization that deals specifically with this component. Other open educational resources there, U.S. Department of State Trafficking in Persons Report, and a lesson plan from the UN on child trafficking. So there are things, again, a bunch of resources that can be used to support it. Here, just saying you can have a classroom discussion about human trafficking and its effect on victims. You can also look and say things too, like how could human trafficking be happening in our community based upon these things that we learn. Unit 2, additional lessons in here on non-traditional crime, lessons around law enforcement efforts to control organized crime, street gangs, cyber crime, law enforcement efforts to control street crime, local, state, regional, and national cooperation on organized crime and street gangs. Moving on to Unit 3, the terminal objectives here being identify the central illegal and legal drugs subject to abuse, analyze the physical, social, and emotional reasons for drug abuse and societal and personal impact of their abuse, assess strategies targeted at reducing both the supply and demand for abused substances. And that's really important because a lot of times we look at it just through a law enforcement lens to say we're going to arrest our way out of the problem. Well, that may impact the supply, but it never really impacts the demand. Demand becomes things that are about behavioral health, becomes components that are about education, and even what education's coming in school to try and reduce the demand for abused substances. Unit 3, an example, illegal drugs, lesson topic being the drug problem. So describe the drug problem in the U.S. All kinds of, again, open resources to take a look at. I updated this one from the written document because it comes out every year. The DEA 2019 Drug Threat Assessment is a good way to look and a good resource to use to say what are the drugs that are impacting us according to the DEA. There's Trends and Statistics, Illegal Drugs in America, a Modern History from the DEA Museum, a PBS series linked on drug wars, a teacher's guide from PBS on the drug wars series, how to know if your kids are vaping marijuana and what to do about it, some links along those, opioids and their risks explained, along with a whole bunch of other open resources that can be used. So an example, the students could prepare a one-page statement on the national drug problem and discuss the issue in class. They could use some of those resources or focus on one, break that DEA drug threat assessment apart and have students work with parts of it and report back on it, find other resources to support it outside of what's in there, and create a short either group or individual oral report on it. Those are some components and things that can be done here. Another lesson from from Unit 3, the societal impact, express the effect of the drug problem on the community. More on trends and statistics, the impacts of drugs on society, consequences of youth substance abuse from different components, and then even from drugabuse.gov, drug abuse costs. There's some components and things that can do where students, you can just leave them with those number of resources and put them in groups about different things and have them generate the lists of impacts of legal and illegal drug use and abuse at the local, state, and even federal levels, and look at that, how that grows or what the differences in on those of that problem are at a local impact, a state impact, and a national impact. So in Unit 3, illegal drugs, additional lessons that are there about drug abuse, personal impact, law enforcement, and the drug issue. Moving into Unit 4, crime scene investigation and forensic science. Terminal learning objectives delineate the processes of evidence collection, beginning with arrival on the scene, demonstrate proper evidence collection procedures, identify and evaluate options for forensic analysis. An example lesson being analysis of forensic evidence, indicate the importance of accurate analysis and forensic evidence, discuss the challenges of presenting forensic evidence in the courtroom and the general issue of courtroom use of technology. A number of resources. This one pulls from the open access textbook that's available there. There's a chapter on forensic sciences, DNA's revolution in the role of freeing the innocent, fingerprint analysis, how it's done, reliable and what's not scientific evidence, digital evidence and forensics, forensic science in the crime lab, and ethics and forensic science. So there's a lot of components in there, a lot of open educational resources, and a lot of options for classroom activities to do with those resources. In Unit 4, additional lessons include the analysis of forensic evidence and practical exercises and games using or for forensic evidence. Unit 5, careers in the justice system. The objectives here being identify the careers available in the American justice system, evaluate the role of law enforcement as first responders, develop and demonstrate ability to administer basic first aid and cardiopulmonary resuscitation. Here, example lesson, careers in the American justice system, identify the major areas and occupations available in the justice system, explore a career that interests you within that. And a lot of this, it relies on the Bureau of Labor Statistics occupational handbook. There are police and detectives, things about employment and wages for police and sheriff patrol officers, correctional officers and benefits, all from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, probation officers and correctional treatment specialists, lawyers, judges and hearing officers, forensic science technicians, career profiles in the U.S. courts. So there's a lot of components there that can then allow students to either can be assigned to examine a career, or they can look at the career that they're interested in critically. And obviously you can tie in guest speakers. And also this is important too, that we hear, about what are the requirements related to their personal conduct and other things that will lead them into that career. What does it require, as they're very different across those components? Everything from a lawyer or a judge to a correctional officer all have different things that lead, different amounts of education required, things of that nature that make that whole criminal justice enterprise work. Another example from Unit 5 is a lesson on preparing for careers in the American justice system. Again, identify and discuss the important preparation you should do for pursuing a career in the justice system, relate the importance of maintaining a clear background as we talk about. So there's a lot of components there, including Maryland police officer standards, examples of police disqualifiers from around the country, the police standards, example from Hagerstown Police Department is there. Maryland State Police applicant polygraph screening booklet can be looked at. The Baltimore County Police hiring process, a site on criminology careers, how to become a police officer, all those components. And again, that's a good time to tie in different components of the community from your criminal justice professionals in the area to tie them and bring them into the classroom to work with students and explain their jobs. So other topics in Unit 5 include the role of law enforcement as first responders, and then CPR and first aid training as a component. So that wraps up our discussion of going through Administration of Justice 2. And again, my contact information is there should there be any questions related to the components here or related to the Administration of Justice 2 course guide. Thank you for joining us.